Iranians want is they want us out of the Gulf. We have tried to encircle Iran. After having encircled the Soviet Union, at least in terms of containment, we seem to think that that was the answer for everything. And so this containment strategy, which was never supposed to be hopelessly militarized, is now the preferred option. We've tried to surround Iran. We're talking about containing China, which is astonishing. If you look at the size of China and its population, its importance. By the way, if you could turn to that chart that I sent earlier today very briefly, there's something that Americans need to understand. Pushing up borrowing costs everywhere except in China. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that China is stable. China is the world's creditor now, not the United States. And China is becoming the global safe haven for wealth, not the United States. Just look at the lines, where they go. What does this mean to the bonds, the treasuries? It means that the yields are rising. They have to rise or you can't attract any investment. That's unsustainable. So quite frankly, I think regardless of what Trump does at this stage, we've seen the end of the petrodollar. That's done. We're going to see probably the yuan petro or the petro basket of currencies or something else, but the petrodollar is finished. That is a huge foundational stone for our prosperity. And Americans need to understand that what we've done is destroy ourselves with this war. Whatever damage we think we've done to Iran, the long-term strategic damage to our country and to the rest of the world is far greater. Iran will survive. Iran will come back. There's no doubt about it. Just as Russia has survived and Russia has come roaring back. China is going to survive and China's roaring back. In fact, China is now the world's largest economy, not the United States. And we've made matters worse because we constantly seem to opt for the threats of military power, because that apparently is the only tool we've got left. Well, we threatened everyone with tariffs. That's backfired badly. I don't see that we benefited from any of that. This president is all about bullying and threats, and it's back to the Roy Cohn School of Business. Number one, deny everything, admit nothing. Number two, threaten everybody, attack all the time. And finally, whatever happens, declare victory, claim that you've got control, that you're in charge, and everything's just fine. When Trump is driven out of office as a result of all of this, and I think it's inevitable at this stage, he's going to be making the same speech on his way out. I'm great. Everything was better under me, and we've been wildly successful. Thanks. No thanks. He's finished.
In breaking developments, Iranian President Pezeshkian posted on X mocking the notion of negotiations in Islamabad, suggesting that diplomatic expectations are completely disconnected from reality. Meanwhile, the physical energy crisis is intensifying. The last commercial tanker that cleared before hostilities broke out has arrived at port, forcing global markets to burn through 400 million barrels of strategic reserves. Aviation fuel costs in Singapore have surged. Domestic airline routes are facing cancellations, and fertilizer shortages threaten harvests well into next season. Doug, these systemic pressures are compounding exponentially by the day.
Well, it's been amateur hour in the White House and amateur hour on the Hill. None of these people have the intellectual or professional depth to do their jobs. That's the simplest explanation for the terrible position we've put ourselves in. It's just that now the so-called curtain is being pulled back. The rest of the world recognizes us for what we are. We're not serious. We're not a serious country. And I'm afraid that that's the widespread opinion of us. And for Americans, what they need to understand, this is analogous to living in a house and watching one of your tenants in the house burn the other one half of the house down. And then the fire is put out. And everybody says, well, thank God the fire's out. At least we've got half a house left. And he says, oh, no, wait. I've got matches. I can burn the rest down. And people say, okay, well, if you think you need to, go ahead and do that. And that's what his supporters in the MAGA movement, whatever number are left, That's effectively what they're saying. Oh, I think it's great what he's doing. He needs to get those guys and kill them. And oh my God. And of course, most of these people have never pulled a trigger in their lives and never shot anything. Maybe Bambi, if that, but that's all. It's depressing, but that's where we are now. And I wish there was some good news, but I just don't see any. And, the fuel business is going to come home to hit us hard. We're going to have unrest in this country through most of the summer. All the usual suspects that were out there before will be out there again, only this time. I think you're going to see the citizenry that has been asleep and been trusting the words of people in Washington for too long also go out on the street. And I think that's going to be very rough.
Looking at operational force posture, the Pentagon has moved additional naval and air assets into theater to restock munitions following the initial 40-day exchange. Over that opening phase, heavy airstrikes destroyed surface infrastructure, yet Iran sustained regular retaliatory barrages from dispersed underground sites while inflicting measurable attrition on regional airframes. If diplomatic talks in Islamabad fail to materialize and the White House orders a renewed air campaign, can additional strike volume achieve a decisive military outcome that the previous round could not?
Well, first of all, I'm not in on the discussions and I'm not sitting in the war room and I haven't seen any plans. I don't expect to receive any calls to inform me. So the best that I can tell you is that we will do what we did the last time, only we will do it with greater gusto. We will pick some new targets on the assumption, and that's my assumption, that based upon the intelligence studies of the last round, they're finding some new targets to attack. And you remember that the key to all of these air and missile campaigns is very much the same. Somebody walks in and says, okay, boss, I've been back over these targets. We've gone through them. We put them through AI. We've analyzed them. We're confident now that we've got the right set of targets. In addition to most of the ones we hit before, we've now got these new ones. We think this is the answer. In other words, you put enough rounds out there, eventually you're going to hit something that counts. I don't think that works, and I've seen that happen before. It's back to World War II. We bombed all sorts of things trying to destroy production. German production never slowed down. But what we did succeed in doing, and we never fully appreciated it until nearly the war was over, was destroy the fuel production and distribution system, because that was key to stopping the German army and the German Air Force. That was vital. And that did more to help the Soviets and their millions of troops reach Berlin than almost anything else we did. Now, I don't know what they're coming up with now, but I think they're going to have a tough time. As we've said before, Iran is a natural fortress. It's enormous inside. It's much larger than Germany was, much larger than Japan. It's the size, half the size of India. And that means the size of Western Europe. So the notion that you're going to find something now to hit that's going to change the outcome, I think, is unlikely. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with the ground troops. My impression is that President Trump, giving credit for getting something right, even a broken clock is right twice a day, he seems to have objected to the use of ground troops. I don't know who is arguing for the seizure of islands in the Persian Gulf, whether it's Karg or Abu Musa or whatever the things they are looking at. Doesn't make any difference. I think it's a waste of time. I don't think it changes anything. I don't see how putting soldiers or Marines on the ground in these places is going to demonstrate that we control anything. It's not going to wrest control away from Iran. And Iran still has 45 to 50,000, I would say, drones and probably 15 to 20,000 or more missiles. Those things are precision guided. They're going to get through and they're going to target wherever we are, whatever we do. So I hope that he sticks with his opposition to the use of ground troops, because I just don't see any payoff for their use in this setting at all. And I think we'll lose a lot unnecessarily. But we don't know what the great men that make these decisions are saying. And remember, President Trump is the sort of man that if he hears something he likes, he leans over right away and says, oh, yeah, I like that, without understanding what he really was told. And so I don't know what Special Operations Command is saying. I don't know what the various service chiefs are saying. I don't know what the CENTCOM commander, Admiral Cooper, is saying. Who knows? And I would be very careful about all these things in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. I think some of what they print is probably true. But unless you were in the room, and you not only heard what was said, but you could see the people saying these things, you can't really pass judgment. A nation of 93 million people to its knees. We're going to destroy its way of life, its existence. But for us, it's just a journey. Well, why is it just a journey for us? Because it's a journey for Israel. And that's the problem. This is the problem that people don't understand. We cannot solve Israel's strategic problems militarily, which is what we're being asked to do right now. Israel was already widely disliked, if not treated as a pariah in the region anyway. Now, the rest of the Islamic world sees Israel as this menace, this virus that is going to ultimately destroy all of them. And all you have to do is look at the map of Greater Israel. The map of Greater Israel includes much of Saudi Arabia, northern Iraq, Syria, Jordan, the Sinai, and some territory west of the Nile, and of course, at least half of Lebanon. And all of this is part of so-called Greater Israel. Well, we used to have something during World War II called Greater Germany, Großdeutschland. This was the expanded Germany. Ultimately, that actually made more sense than what we're seeing, because at least there were Germans living on the territory, not always in the majority, but there. In this case, we're talking about whole populations that have to be subjected to Gaza treatment. They're going to have to be effectively subjugated, enslaved, or driven out. This is insane. And this is what we are fighting for. People need to understand this. And I don't see any evidence that it could possibly exist. We've always had the objective of gaining control of the oil fields in the region. You've got to go back into the 1990s and go back and read the things that Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz and a host of others in their group of neocons were writing and insisting that if we could control all the oil resources in the Middle East, then we would have China by the throat. Of course, the real intention was not just to have China by the throat, but to make Israel the undisputed champion and king of the Middle East. I don't think we're going to ever get China by the throat, nor do I think we as Americans need to do that. That's absurd. But I think we're back to where we were before. This is all about Israel and securing it and making it safe and putting it in charge of the whole region. All of this is going to fail. It has no chance of success. And this business of bombing a nation into the Stone Age, I must say, I do disagree with one thing you said. You said, well, Dresden, we can't do what we did there. No, I think we can. And I think the Iranians know this. And their cities already show evidence for it. We're doing things that we have not done since the Second World War or Vietnam. And one can argue that our bombings, both we and the Royal Air Force during World War II, committed war crimes. And you can make the argument that we did the same thing in Vietnam. And I think we're going to do the same thing here. Ultimately, you end up destroying power. You put hospitals out of business. The Israelis have been bombing hospitals in Iran and emergency centers ever since the war began. And they launched a number of strikes last night, I think because they worry that they might end up facing a ceasefire. I don't think there's any chance of a ceasefire coming. I think what they're going to end up facing is something worse than they've already encountered from Iran and potentially others that support Iran. He's in this escalatory trap. He doesn't know how to do anything else but bully. So what he's trying to do is bully once again. Remember, we talked about, if it fails, what else do you do? Well, you escalate. Well, you could turn around and say, well, escalation isn't the answer. But there's no one telling him to do that as far as I can tell. And I certainly don't see great evidence for people standing up at the Department of Defense and telling him, sir, this is not going to work. And if you do this, we could end up in a much wider war with a lot of other people. And by the way, we mentioned escalation beyond the borders of the Eastern Hemisphere. In other words, could there be escalation here in the Western Hemisphere against us? And the answer is yes. The drug cartels, which have always been the real threat to us in Mexico, are for hire, and they have an interest in seeing to it that they continue to move drugs and people back and forth across our borders and coastal waters. So could they possibly cooperate with Iran? Absolutely, without question. There are already Hezbollah chapters down in Mexico. They've never taken any action against us, but they exist. The Sunni chapters, the ISIS / Al Qaeda, Al Nusra crowd, they've been much more active in Mexico. But all of these things could blow up in our faces inside our country. They could destroy our refineries, our oil infrastructure. What about our nuclear power plants? Could they cause accidents there? There are a whole range of things. And we have not done what we need to do to secure our own infrastructure. We started under Obama, and Obama diverted all of the money that was supposed to go into modernization of the power grid and other things into the pockets of his campaign supporters. So we didn't get much out of it. We really do need to pay attention to our own domestic infrastructure, particularly our electrical grid, our power grid. So yeah, I think that could happen.
Turning to ground contingencies, proposals have circulated regarding the deployment of Marine Expeditionary Units and airborne brigades from the 82nd to seize tactical footholds such as Karg Island, backed by A-10s and Apache attack helicopters. What can a light infantry footprint realistically achieve against hardened coastal defenses? And what are the operational risks of attempting to hold territory under persistent missile and drone fire?
It's important for Americans to understand something. What you do as a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine after you arrive is much more important than how fast you get there. Right now, the emphasis on light and fast. Why are we sending a brigade for the 82nd? Well, because we can. You load up 3,000 men. Now, of course, the Army, as always, has said, well, if we're going to send a brigade, we have to have a division headquarters on the ground to manage it. So 3,000 troops need a 2-star general with a 1-star general as deputy, and probably 150, 200, maybe more people to plan and conduct operations. This is a sort of standard, World War II nonsense that we go through. And then the Marines. We're going to put Marines there because we can float them in, and then we can put them somewhere. Well, the problem is once you put the paratrooper on the ground, once you put the Marine on the ground, the Ranger, whoever it is, what are they going to do? What can they do? Are they going to seize and hold something of great value? What is the seizure about? If they go to an island, can they hold that island? Well, I think we're finding out that islands are extremely vulnerable. Unless it's the size of Borneo, that means that all sorts of precision strike missiles and unmanned systems can annihilate everything on the island. So if you think you're going to go on an island and then hold it for what? What's the benefit? How does it help you? And see, from the Iranian standpoint, they're probably sitting there asking themselves, how could we be this stupid? And we shouldn't get confused. We're not saying that Marines or soldiers or anybody else are not good, solid people that are well-trained and reasonably well-led, I hope, and disciplined. It's not the point. Is what are they going to do when they get there? And how much can you expect of them? So that's why I go back to this thing of, well, we'll seize the islands. Now, if you look at the straits, and this is very hot, very important. I just wrote a piece on Substack that goes into some detail on this. If you go through all the thinking and then you say, well, I'm going to introduce ground troops and I'm going to seize the straits. What does that mean? If you look at the sides of the strait, in other words, the coastline, you're talking about 1,000 feet of cliff. In other words, this is an uphill climb in the worst sense of the word. Are you then going to land troops further to the east and then make the long march around to take it from the landward side? I mean, what are you doing? If you're going to put them on an island, once they're sitting on the island, what kind of control or influence are they going to assert? And the answer is none, because the place will be pulverized. It'll be covered by rockets and missiles. Anything on it will be exterminated. I mean, that's the easy thing to do. What else would you do? Now, of course, if you're going to make the argument that the Iranians are running out of missiles, which reminds me of the Russian army running out of missiles and rockets and so forth, then maybe it's fine. Maybe you could go there and open the chaise lounge chair and take in some sun. But the point is, I don't think so. And I don't think that you can stop from 150 kilometers away, all sorts of weapons being launched against those sites. And again, we're back to persistent surveillance. What are you going to do that's going to fool anybody? Where are you going to stage forces? Are you going to try and stage them in Kuwait, in Bahrain? Are you going to try and stage out of Oman? I doubt seriously the Omanis will be receptive to that idea. Are you going to try and stage out of the UAE? Anywhere you go or you try to mass forces, it's going to be picked up, it's going to be targeted, and you're going to be brought under effective fire. So the problem with all of this is, do we have these capabilities? Yeah, we got lots of light infantry. Much of it's good. It'll go where you send it. But what are you asking it to do? And I think at the moment, we're asking them to do the impossible, to exert control over geography that they can't control. It's not a question of, are there not enough of them? It's simply a question of surveillance and strike. And if you don't have that advantage, if you can't rob the enemy of ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and you can't defeat his intermediate range or tactical ballistic missiles and so forth, what are you going to do? Perhaps we're going to have to go through this in order to learn this lesson the hard way.
There has also been ongoing speculation regarding direct action special operations missions targeting enriched nuclear material stockpiles to eliminate potential breakout capability. Given the operational range, subterranean dispersion, and layered air defense networks involved, is a surgical interdiction raid of that nature plausible in this environment?
Well, there's gold Amazon jungles. Why don't you go find it? Good luck. I mean, you're looking for the proverbial needle in a haystack. Now, you can try and detect things using satellite imagery as well as other means of detection overhead to see whether or not you found something that's radioactive. But I'm not sure you're going to end up with what you're looking for. It doesn't take that much material to alert somebody in space or flying overhead. What if you alert on 15, 20 places? Do you line them up and go to them in succession? How do you get there? Are you going to fly in a helicopter? Helicopters are so vulnerable. You can knock them down with rocks. So how do you get in and get out without being detected? And that's the biggest problem I have with all of these assumptions. The other thing is, I read recently, somebody said, we may need as many as 200,000 troops. If you go back to the Dardanelles in 1915, it started really in earnest in February of 1915. It lasted for 9 months. They went in initially, these are the straits between Turkey and Europe, what we call the Bosporus. And the idea was that you seize the straits so that you could pass the Royal Navy through. They can then take Constantinople, now Istanbul, under direct fire. You can land more troops and seize the capital and knock the Turks out of the First War. It was very attractive. Everybody thought this was a great idea. Well, not everybody. The chief of naval operations thought it was insane, but Churchill, who was effectively the Secretary of the Navy, overrode him and said, no, this will be successful. Churchill did these kinds of things routinely. If he didn't agree, he just dismissed expert opinion and then would go off on these tangents and do incredibly stupid things. The Dardanelles operation was a good example. And there were something like 20 forts, fortified positions up and down the straits the Turks had built with heavy artillery. Then on top of that, you had over 300,000 Turkish troops that showed up. Beyond that, you had mines of all different types and kinds, mines that sank 3 battleships and numerous other supporting vessels. Ultimately, they ended up with 500,000 men on the Gallipoli Peninsula. 500,000 troops, mostly British, some New Zealanders, some Australians, British Indian Division, which seldom gets mentioned. It deserves credit. They fought well. And some Frenchmen, 500,000 men. It was a disaster because, once again, you were going uphill. And the Turks held the high ground. The Turks lost 87,000 men killed. I don't know how many the British and others lost, but it's probably pretty close to that.
48,000, actually. I looked that up the other day.
The Turks won. And how could they lose? It was impossible to defeat them, given the terrain and the circumstances. So what I'm trying to get across is, people seem to have read the story of the Dardanelles but they didn't read the whole way through. They read the first few chapters, said, oh, this is a great idea, let's do it. Didn't bother to read the concluding chapter, which was catastrophic failure. It was a dumb idea. What they're talking about trying to do with ground troops in the Straits of Hormuz, in my judgment, is an equally dumb idea. Unless, of course, and I could be wrong about this, you have annihilated all of the intermediate range and tactical ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. You have eliminated all of the unmanned systems that could be basically launched and hurled at you, so that the place is barren. And then, even more important, perhaps you can jam all the satellites, Chinese and Russian and others, that are providing assistance and support and imagery to the Iranians. If you can do all of those things, then I suppose you can put people on the ground with